Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Black Spaces. I'm Todd, and I am joined by my co-pilots of Naeem and Toya, and we're coming to you from, we'll say, the broadcasting studios of Black Spaces. You haven't seen us in a while. We took a little bit of a hiatus, but that's all right. Take whatever time you need in life. But we decided that we would get the band back together because of this special event with regards to Star Wars Andor. And so we're going to just talk for a few moments about lessons learned from Star Wars Andor, our own impressions, etc. But thank you again for joining us. We want to, if you could like and subscribe, you'll be hearing maybe a little bit more for us in the future, and we got some special things in store for you. But again, thank you for remaining loyal fans of our channel. Let me kind of chime in with my co-pilots here. This plane is driven by three co-pilots as opposed to a pilot and co-pilot. So do you drive a plane or do you fly it? Anyway, don't put me in a spaceship. Okay, so what is your basic assessment of Star Wars Andor? Whether it be episodes or characters, just give me your hey, love this about it, maybe not so great. Just what impressions did it leave you with in terms of watching this Star Wars series? And Naeem, you can go, and then and Toya, and then I'll flip the order. Okay.
New series, very fresh, original. The first series hooked me in. The second finished it off. I would say mostly it made me sad for the Andor character. Once you got to the very end and you learned everything, it's almost like really his destiny was chosen for him without him knowing things, and it just really made his sacrifice even more just heavy hearted for me. So, but overall, it's a beautiful piece of work.
All right. Okay. All right. So would you say it was Star Wars masterpiece? I've heard those words used in reference to
Definitely,
it. Okay.
definitely.
Okay. Okay. All right. And as a diehard Star Wars fan, you that's a high assessment if you call it a masterpiece.
So mainly because it's something that wasn't just about Jedi's and Sith. Like it was showing you the realness of how everything got started, how it affects everyday people, what they had to go through. So I would say it was very close to lore, but it was something that you typically don't see.
Right. 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 In fact, I heard that Tony Gilroy told his writers, "You may be Star Wars fangirls and fan guys, but put all of that aside. Put all of that aside, and let's write a drama series, and kind of rooted in Gilroy's genre, which is spy and espionage." Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks. Toya, what's your basic assessment of Andor?
I think it was a wonderful version of the Star Wars. It continues the mythology that we have grown to love. Star Wars has been around, what, 4 decades now?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it was a compliment to Andor that it brought something fresh to the table. And I would want to say that for those of us who grew up with it, it gives you more of a desire to go back and revisit to see how everything ties together. I like the fact that, Star Wars has always been about like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo.
Right.
Andor really gives you an opportunity to get to know the people behind the resistance,
Right.
get a sense of what led up to these big moments where you have Princess Leia and Obi-Wan Kenobi. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a really good addition to the canon, and I was engaged through all 12 episodes because every episode gave you something new and it
Right.
built on, so that when you finally got to the end and
Right.
to the point where see how his destiny was already selected for him, you get an impression of what led him to that point and
Mm-hmm.
all those that played a part, be it big or small.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I love Dandor. I'm one of those fans who says I'm not. I don't lament it ending because good things have to come to an end, otherwise they can take a certain trajectory. And so, ending on a brilliant high point matters. to me, and every good story should have an ending. And so, yeah, I'd like to see more. I'd like to actually just see more great Star Wars like this. It doesn't necessarily have to be Andor, although, I understand some fans lamenting it ending. When we get to the whole discussion about impact on Star Wars, it's funny for me. So, they said that this was Star Wars for grown folks. And, and if, like us, if you grew up with Star Wars, and I remember I got some gray hair. So I remember in 1977 sitting in the theater as an almost teen. And, so, but watching the Andor made me kind of think of the New Hope. So this is, of course, this is what Andor leads up to, from Andor to Rogue One to A New Hope, Episode 4. And what it made me see those episodes as being like the romantic telling of that story, right? Because it seems to me if Tony Gilroy had done like the destruction of Alderaan, it would have played entirely differently than it did in episode 4, right? Because you could see, sort of Gilroy was being very real, very gritty, like the prison heist, like the Gorman massacre. These things were just so visceral, right? And so it was really, it put the war in Star Wars. The human sacrifice, the destroyed lives, the individuals who were not going to be there, all of that. It wasn't just sort of, a sort of Flash Gordon Saturday morning serial cartoon. It was very much a gritty telling of the Star Wars story, but very much still Star Wars. So I loved it from the standpoint of it being all of those things, and that Gilroy did kind of put all the sort of the fan service aside per se to kind of tell this story. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
It's funny that you mentioned cartoons because it even ties into the Star Wars. Oh God, it's the one after the Bad Batch with Kanan Jarrus.
Okay.
But it's the episode with Kanan Jarrus is they're the group that picks Mon Mothma up
Yes.
from Andor's people
Right.
and brings her to Yavin. And again, it's I love how it transitions to a very serious show into it's still an animated show. So it's like it's for kids, but it's not for kids.
That's right.
But it's also to wake them up as well, because these are the things that have to happen. Like, yeah, people unfortunately die to make these things happen.
Right.
But I've always wondered things like that from watching Star Wars. Like, yes, the Battle of Yavin was amazing, but
Right.
how did all this happen? Like, how did this all like come together? Like, the Empire is so, security. How did the information leak? And it's funny how they show the seed inception of an idea
Right.
go from leading all the way up to A New Hope,
Right.
which again, that was Andor's kind of message, was to bring the message of hope, because the bellhop gave it to him, he gave it to the
Right.
girl, and it just keeps passing.
That's right. That's right. That's right. In fact, man, you would know this better than I do. Was I'm trying to think. Was it when Mothma sort of said many Bothans have been killed? Was that in order to get this information? Was that episode 5 and the second Death Star, or was that the first?
No,
Was that New Hope in the first Death Star?
it was the first one.
Okay. Okay.
And I always kind of wondered about that,
Oh,
especially
episode 4.
from like Rogue One when it came out,
Uh-huh.
because I'm like, I don't. Where's all the
Right,
Bothans?
right, right. So to me, my point being that it showed the actual sacrifice, right? Rogue
Right.
One definitely showed the sacrifice, with Caitlin Urso and well,
Jalen.
Jalen
Yeah.
Urso and Cassian Andor literally dying in each other's arms as the planet is exploded from the Death Star. But you get the sense of, well, all the intrigue of the folk who had real sacrifices even leading up to Rogue One. So that, as opposed to just making a casual reference, they really dig down to see here were the concrete sacrifices, friends that died, like Mon Mothma and Tay, her childhood friend. She ain't gonna
Man,
see him again. We know what happened. He
Right.
hops in that car. He ain't coming back.
That long drive home that didn't
Long
make it
drive
home.
home. Right. Uh-huh.
she she lied. She was lying to herself because
Right.
I feel Luthen was valid. This was never going to stop.
No.
It was always going to be something, and he was going to always hold this over their head. And you got to cut that off like immediately.
Right.
And
Right. 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 So you're thinking, Toya, and I'm gonna ask you because Toya, you're a writer. So what did you think of the writing of this show? What's your perspective as a writer?
It was exceptional writing. I think that it gave so much weight to what was going on. I think the success of good writing is knowing what not to say,
Right.
particularly when you're writing for a television program where you have the scenery,
Mm-hmm.
the unspoken, the body language that
Mm-hmm.
carries the scene. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that there was good utilization of that. Like when the characters spoke, their words held value.
Right.
And you, as a viewer, got a chance to really feel the struggle of what they were going through. You got to see it as well as see like the dialogue where you have characters that you want to say more,
Right.
but you're not in a safe environment, or you have to be
Right.
prudent with what you can say when you can say it.
Right.
I think that there's a whole dynamic of what is the truth,
Right.
what is the relevance of telling the whole truth when a half truth actually is needed, or just straight out lying.
That's right.
Who
That's right.
knows what. So I think the writing really made what was going on soar and more relatable. Even though we're in these far distant planets with all these creatures,
Right.
the struggle is universal, that you want to have something be successful when you're facing so many challenges, some that you can predict and some you can't.
Mm-hmm. I think to your point, Toya, very much to your point, the dialogue or monologues of Luthen Rael
Mm.
were Shakespearean. That I haven't heard any better monologue from a character. And I know I'm a sci-fi and Star Wars fan or nut, but when Rael had that dialogue in the first season with Lonnie,
yeah,
Mm.
I have to employ the weapons of my enemy. And I am, in effect, he said something that was biblical, but in the sense of that I'm essentially, growing trees for fruit under which I will never sit. I will
Mm.
never see, I'm
the
saying,
sunrise. Yeah,
what was the line? Something about I'll never see the sunrise. Da, 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 da. Yeah. So those were just like Shakespearean. I mean, it's sort of like it was powerful. I like, damn. Yeah, so it was powerful. And then even into the second season, there were many of those. Even Mon Mothma's first speech. That's what the thing about is
Mm.
Gilroy. He was respectful to Star Wars lore, so when it came to like, oh well, Mon Mothma does this great speech where clearly she aligns with the rebellion against the Emperor, and that's where she splits. Like now, you know what I'm gonna do? That's the second speech. Here's the first one. Here's the one she said in the Senate as to why he disbanded the Senate and went after. In fact, Gilroy gives you in that dialogue, and to your point, Toya, the what's not said
Mm.
when Bail Organa uses that parliamentary
Mm.
device to permit Mon Mothma to speak. That's when I said, oh, that's why Alderaan,
Mm.
because he permitted her to speak. That's why Alderaan had to go.
Right.
Anyway, I mean
one reason.
that's one reason. I'm sorry, one reason. So anyway, but yeah, that dialogue, those interactions, yeah, yeah. What else did you find at least intriguing? And then we'll get on to some of our other questions. What other things stuck out? What characters stuck out? I've already declared that probably Luthen was among my favorite characters. He was just, he was he was so gritty and good.
I like Mon Mothra. I
Okay.
like
Okay.
her journey.
Okay.
I like in season 2 where you had a chance to see the mother. I think the
Yes.
interaction between her and her daughter
Right.
was so telling because she's torn to play this traditional role where when they're having all these parties, she's still doing the business of politics and trying to make sure
Right.
all that she's put into making the resistance and the rebellion successful through her way of doing so as a politician is still in play, but you're still trying to deal with what's going on with your daughter being, wanting to rush to marriage. And you're trying to tell her, maybe you need to think about this a little bit more. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
tradition isn't the way that we need to go,
Right.
with
Right.
all things.
Right.
And I like the way that her trajectory went. I love the whole aspect of her, even when she's confronted with the treachery and the bugging. I love that scene when her assistant is, going through and find the bug, and she's shook, and I need to make this speech, but I'm outside, and
Right.
her second guessing who to trust.
Right.
When Luthen
Right.
comes and tells her what's going on, and she's still, I believe, she wavered until she saw Andor there, and she still was. I mean, Cassius, she was still wavering.
Right.
It wasn't until he took her hand and said, "Come on, let's go."
Right.
That I think the gravity of all the words and all the speeches really hit home. This is real. And
Mm-hmm.
I like how we saw her at the conclusion where she's still being a politician, but she's still, I feel, more rooted in the real of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, clearly a transformation. Yeah, 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 yeah. Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts, Naeem, in terms of favorite characters? Characters, hard to
I
pick.
Well, it is hard to pick. I would say what comes in a close second was definitely K2. Like the robot's hilarious.
I love the sassiness.
But
Yeah.
I would say my top favorite character would have to have been Clea.
Hmm. Okay.
And it's
Interesting.
so funny because even in the beginning, like watching season 2, I was talking to my fiance and I'm like, I need to know who she is
Right.
because it seems like she's running things
Right.
more than anyone. Like she's the muscle, the backbone, she's keeping him calm,
Right.
she's keeping everybody in check, has
Right.
all the schedules, like, and
Right.
I'm like, man, like who is this woman? Why does she have such command
Right.
over basically everything? And then when they finally gave her backstory, and I was like,
That's right.
I know the moment of when she had to take Luthen's life was it was so emotional in so many ways because in
I agree.
some sense this was like a father to her.
That's right.
But this was also the same man who was in charge of the group that came to slaughter her family and her people.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's kind of like you had this coming. It's kind of almost glad it's me doing it because it's justice,
Right.
but I still care for the person that I've basically trauma bonded with
Right.
over the centuries,
Right. 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 Right.
fighting with each other, doing all this stuff, looking out. They basically had a father and daughter type of relationship
Right.
until the very end. Um, Even when Andor came to talk to her, like you could tell it just rocked her so much. Like she was not the steady person that she was anymore.
Right.
She's shaken and delirious and just all over the place. And I'm
Right.
like, wow. But yeah, I would say Clea was from season 1 and season 2, she was almost like the deadliest character that stayed in the shadows for the
Right.
most
Right.
part.
Right. 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 Yeah.
I
And
think to your point that when she went in to kill Luthen, that they thought it was a team of people that came and did this, and they were like, "What? It was one woman?" Yes,
That
she was
part.
on it.
all right.
That part, because it
Yeah.
was so coordinated, the bombings and the shootings, and he's dead, and oh no, like it's got to be a team. No,
Right.
no,
Right.
It was a nurse. As nurses do. It was a
Boy.
nurse.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, and to me, there's so many things as folk go back and analyze Andor. There's so many things where there's sort of foreshadowing. You know, the fact that you go back and get the story of Luthen and Claire and of how they met. You know, in relative to him being part of the Imperial Army and them carrying out a genocide, but then he has all these doubts and he saves her. Um, but you get into the I don't know if it was there or I don't recall if it was shortly into their journey together or if it was when they were at Naboo where he talked about no, I think it's before Naboo where he talked about you and I will are you my father? And it's like, well, I'll be your father when it's convenient, right?
Right.
So when they at the end, it wasn't convenient for him to be her father in order for her to kill him, right? And so, but she loved him. She loved him, and you get the sense he loved her. And so you knew that bond was there, whether they called it, whether they were living such dangerous lives for the rebellion that they couldn't even claim it, right? So because and that's an interesting way of the Jedi attachment, right? not to bring all this up, but the idea of that attachments, love makes one vulnerable, right? And so, and can you afford to be vulnerable in the thick of espionage for rebellion against the empire? So, all those things are interesting. Let me ask you about Dedra and Cyril Karn. I mean, talk about fatal attraction. Just real quick. So what about? Because I thought Dedra, to me, I like my villains complex, right? In fact, I think in any sort of drama, the I'm of the opinion that the villain being complex is really what makes the story, right? Because the hero is going to do hero things. We see ourselves in the hero, da da da. But we should see a little bit of ourselves even in the villain and the choices they have to make. And that Dedra, she just knew that she was going to be rewarded for her loyalty because she had to go around the system. And they said, nope. Right. By the way, this is not a spoiler-free review, but and so to me, I don't know. I think both of them had this faith in the order, but the order had no loyalty to them. Ultimately. So I don't know. What do you think of that them as characters? We won't even discuss the mother, but who like a K2SO but 4 feet tall. What did y'all think?
I liked Cyril's journey. I
Okay.
liked that as he in season 1 was just so blindly focused, laser on getting this done, and then in season 2 when he had a chance to really see the people and interact with them, and then the betrayal that he realized that he had been a pawn. Like his mother told him when you were sent there, in a sense, these people are not your friends.
That's right.
You know.
That's right.
And then when he realized it, and then when he confronts her with it, like, what did you know? When did you know it? Why did you tell me? And then he's like, I wish you the best of luck. You know. So I like the fact that he had the scales fall from his eyes eventually.
Okay.
And realize how much of a pawn and how much he really bought the party line when it wasn't something that was beneficial to him. But even then, when he had a chance to really take it to Andor, which I was surprised that fight lasted as long as it did, because he had a whole lot of rage pent up in him.
Oh my!
But they were going. I mean, I'm like, this is a trained fighter that you're doing fisticuffs with, and you are actually holding your own.
Yep.
So I liked his arc, and I like the fact that she got what she deserved. You're doing all this, and you think you're gonna be the one that's being held aloft on shoulders, but where you end up, again, spoiler alert, you end up in a jail cell crying yourself to sleep.
Right.
So,
and possibly,
and you did all that for that.
Yeah. By the way, just as a footnote, Toya, I heard that the finger on top of the head,
Ooh.
that was an ad lib. But that
So,
was a hell of an effective ad lib. I'm gonna
so
literally drill
Cyril
down.
laying on the bed.
Cause I'm like,
And so was
ow.
laying on the bed. Okay, okay.
Yeah, that wasn't part of the script, but the actor, he was like, I know what I would be doing in this situation, and
Curling
when
up
you
in a
saw,
fetal.
like, everyone was like, oh,
Hmm.
yeah.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. So what do you think, Naeem? In some ways, maybe to Toya's point about the bad guys getting what they deserve, but they were interesting, complex bad guys. Yeah. Hmm.
For Cyril, um, I felt his journey was incredibly sad,
Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
Right.
mainly because he, even though we don't want to talk about his mother basically raised him for an entire life to make himself seem like he was nothing.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
then when he got his job at, what was it, Recor or whatever it's called, he was just obsessed with trying to prove himself to somebody.
Right.
And that's where his obsession with Andor came in.
Right.
And he just, even in season 2, even though he's being lied to, he thinks that he's trying to drag in access because he knows that Andor is with access.
Right.
He's just after Andor, like he kind of like the same way Deidre was obsessed with finding access,
Right.
he was obsessed with trying to find Andor.
Right.
And similar to what Toya said, is when he finally snapped and was choking Deidre and fighting Andor, this is a lifetime of anger and
Right.
being manipulated and just lied to. Like, he just literally snapped. And when Andor said, "Who are you?" I felt like that broke him in two ways. One,
Right.
Mhm.
Andor has never thought about you a single day
Right.
in his life.
Right.
After that one moment you guys crossed each other's paths
Right.
and he held him up to gunpoint. Never thought about you. But then I also think when he said that, Cyril himself no longer knew who he was.
Point.
Mm.
After
Right.
what he was realizing what's happening, he's been used. This is all set up to be a massacre. Everything that he was working to believe, it's not real.
Right.
And
Right.
and I think that just broke him before the blaster did.
Right. Yeah, Naeem,
um,
that's sort of like the Andor after this titanic struggle, this kick butt fight as Toya was talking about between Andor and Cyril. When you said that about who are you, it's sort of like okay, here's a high school literary reference, the high school literature we got to take. It's like the whale saying to Ahab, "Who are you?" You've
right,
wrapped your whole identity around conquering me, and I don't even know who you are. I'm like, from
exactly,
Adam. Right.
exactly.
Right. Right.
Because Access knew who Deidre was,
Right.
but Andor never thought about him. And
Mhm.
and Deidre, she she was, again, she had this weird obsession with trying to find access.
That's right.
But I don't even know if it's about trying to be rewarded or not because her previous boss, the older guy, he told her, like, listen, Gorman is your ticket. Like,
Right.
this
That,
this
that,
is what
mhm.
you need to do to really shoot up the ranks.
Yeah.
And you
Yes,
could
ma'am.
tell
Mhm.
from the entire thing she was very uncomfortable. I guess this is one of the first times she actually had to be there
Right.
and be around all of these
Right.
people and see
Right.
faces. Because yeah, that scene after all the chaos ended and she just had like that breakdown
Right.
Mhm.
where it's like I think that was her realizing the person who I thought I was, I literally just killed them with these people.
Right.
Like
Mhm.
Right.
my soul is gone. Like I've condemned this.
Right.
And the only thing she had left, again, was her obsession with finding access. I don't even think she wanted to find him again for merit. I think that because Cyril is gone, Gorman is over, her soul is gone. She only had access left
Right.
to focus on.
That's right.
Um, I thought it was the scene in the shop, like
Oh
the
yeah,
way
her coming in at the
Luther
end.
was talking to her. He's just like he's just so confident, like it's not here. And she like swears she had him, and he
uh,
still denied.
right, right, and that's the one bit of foreshadowing I saw coming when he pulled out the
Yeah,
knife. I said he gonna use
Right.
that on himself.
agreed.
Right.
Agreed. He grabbed that on purpose. Like
Hmm.
no,
Mhm.
you're not getting nothing.
Right, you're not getting.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and I think not only did she end up in again poetic justice, she ended up in the same type of prison Andor was in,
Right.
making parts for the Death Star.
Yep, yep, yep.
And
She was still
and
a cog, just on the other
and, and,
side.
and it just goes to show you that none of you were worth anything to the Empire. Like you're just batteries. Once
Just
they're
a
done,
cog. Mhm.
execution, jail, whatever.
Right, right, right. Well, and we'll get to lessons learned because that's a big question we wanted to speak to this show. But let me just ask, and maybe I'll ask these questions, two questions together of what does this show do for the lore, and what does this show do for us?
Mm.
What should we take away from Andor? Because there's a whole bunch of discussion and chatter about why is Star Wars getting political. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But what does it do for the lore, and what does it do for us more broadly, particularly in the moment we're in politically, et cetera, et cetera? What answer that however you feel comfortable answering it, because I know it's a lot. Hmm.
To me, it really, in terms of the lore, it sort of gives you the perspective that every giant move forward starts with a few steps,
Hmm.
and that everyone has a part to play,
Hmm.
and that even when it's easy to focus on the big gestures, but it's the little gestures, it's the slight acts of defiance that allows the big actions to take place.
Hmm.
It's the
Hmm.
people that you don't think have the power
Right.
that makes the difference. It's the shopkeeper. It's
Hmm.
the people that are working in the office that when the head is turned, downloads the file or put the file in the right person's hands. And I think that's the lesson that sort of builds upon the lore that we've grown to love in Star Wars, and also what we can take for our own selves is you don't have to be Han Solo flying through the galaxy. Sometimes you can just be the person that is allowing someone else to make the move,
Hmm.
and being the person that allows the space, to the point of the innkeeper
Right.
where Andor comes back the second time and he's someone else and he recognizes him and
Right.
he tells him, one, this other person, she's going to report this, but don't worry about it because you were never here. It's that
Uh-huh.
small act of defiance in his
That's right.
position.
That's right. Hmm.
Who would have thought the hotel clerk
Right.
would be the
Play
linchpin?
a
And
part.
even to the point at the very end when he threw the blast bomb,
Right.
that was his big move. But he
Right.
had made the move all before. He
That's right.
put Andor in that room for a reason.
Right.
Even if he didn't know, he knew you need to be in this room that has this grand view of the
Hmm.
plaza to put in
Hmm.
perspective. Even
Right.
though they don't want to talk about this, let me share what's happening. Let me be the person that doesn't let the story die. I was there.
Right.
Don't let the narrative get twisted. Don't let people think or make you think it didn't happen. That's how we have to be. We have to be the one to tell the story.
There you go. There you go. Hmm. I like that. Like that. What do you think, Naeem? What does it do for the lore? What does it do for us? Or what lessons should we take from Andor in our current moment?
For the lore, I think it plays exactly into the lore because they always said that the force is in all living things.
Hmm.
So, similar to what Toya was saying, is that it's not just the big moments. Like everything has to lead to something. Like again, if just like Krennic pointed out, if it wasn't for Deidre obsessively looking for access, nobody ever would have learned about the Death Star, but it just so happens
Right.
that files for no reason were sent to her. Who knows why?
Right.
That's always a good question, but who knows why?
Yes.
And it's just these little things that happen in different people that all kind of bring together a culmination. Because I mean, we already said spoiler alert, but you can't tell me nothing. Vix's baby is
Yes. Right.
Pedro
It's Paul
not
Dameron.
Pedro Pascal. Yeah, Dameron, Poe Dameron. That's Poe Dameron growing
Okay.
up.
Uh-huh.
But I would say for us, this is the writers. I loved how they intertwined reality into, if you don't want to see it in reality, maybe we have to show it to you in fantasy.
Right.
Because look how the propaganda and the smear campaigns about the Gorman people were happening, riling everybody up to justify, everything. If it means I have to kill one trooper to spark it, it doesn't matter as long
Right.
as the ends justify the means. The pure manipulation, willingness to commit genocide for whatever reasons possible. They've talked about visas in the show, being
Right.
illegal immigrants,
Whole nine.
running, just
Irrelevant.
trying to live a decent life and, just exist, but you won't let us exist.
Right.
People abusing their authority when the guy was trying to rape Bix.
Right.
And love when she beat the mess out of him
Oh
too,
my.
because he deserved that.
Uh-huh.
But I think there's so many life lessons of the current state of things that people can take from it, because again, I've seen so many times where they'll say you recognize the evil in the empire, but you don't see it in real life. So maybe
Right.
if we start using some realistic terms
Right.
that are being talked about right now,
Right.
then it'll start clicking in some people's head, like, oh
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute, I've seen this before.
Right. 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 Yeah, it's intriguing that all of this discussion, and I've seen various sci-fi and Star Wars commentators who I enjoy their programming, and the various folks have reminded us, it's like, well, George Lucas, and because it was actually an interview, and I'll post this in the description, this link in the description, but George Lucas had an interview with James Cameron, and they were having this conversation about, well, what's the value of sci-fi to you, and Cameron echoed the point that Lucas was raising. He says, now wait a minute, remember that one of my great sort of initial sci-fi masterpiece pieces was THX 1138, right? Talking about detachment, alienation, a police state. So Lucas says, I started off, and I still am, into social science fiction. I've never been the guy who's sort of talking about sort of alternate realities for in rocket ships for rocket ships' sake. It has always been social reality. And in fact, he compared the resistance to the Viet Cong. When I was writing it, back in the 70s, that stuff, it wasn't sort of quote unquote the terrorist, it was the Viet Cong, and making a case about going up against a colonial, he used that word, and colonial and imperial power, and the resistance against that colonial imperial power. So, that's the irony, is that folk, yes, sci-fi is escapism, but like we say on our show, and said through various other shows, there's always some meaning that we can glean from it, because science fiction is a great genre to talk about what is or what should be, right? And so, and let's be real, and I'm not going to go too far on this point, but the audience can read in between the lines. Um, well, who is the big bad who survives all of it? At the very top. Sounds like what autocracy is. It's like people get crushed along the way, but it's the big bad who everyone has to care about. The Emperor Palpatine. He even lives into and Palpatine is back. He even outlives sort of death. But Deidre, Cyril Karn, Pendergast, they all gone. They were all cogs, and cogs not for the good reason. And you don't hear about You don't hear about, unlike Andor, to your point, Naeem, you don't hear about Bix and Bix's child, so that you made this sacrifice, but there is this hopeful future. There's a new hope. There is no new hope on that side. And so to me, it's a rich text to kind of pull from this question about, to your point, Toya, who are the quote unquote little people along the way whose sacrifices were instrumental, and what can we take from, what small things can we do for the purposes of positive change in the world we're in, given all the things that we confront in today's political climate. All right. So any other thoughts or conclusions, or what takeaway would you want to leave the audience with? Toya, we'll start with you, and then Naeem, and I'll round us off. So what's the takeaway for you that you um, think is important relative to Andor?
I think everyone can play a part when fighting back bad governance. I think that each of us have opportunities that are within our reach to make a difference. Don't be hesitant when you see an injustice. Act on it. Act on it in a way that will sometimes make you feel uncomfortable, but act knowing that you're not by yourself. Even if you can't physically lay eyes on someone who is resisting, the resistance is there. The resistance takes many forms. Don't let oppressive government take away your right to stand up for yourself. Know that there will be losses. Know that there will be losses that will outweigh the gains. This is not a sprint. This is a long distance foot race. You may get, injured along the way. You may get jostled. You may have to pull ahead of the pack, or you may have to run with the pack, but you have to do something. You can't just let what is wrong ride. You have to be active in any way that is possible.
Here, 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 here. All right. Naeem, what do you think?
Agree with a lot of things of what Toya said as well. Just in general, like as you said, everyone can make a difference, a small impact. You doing one thing can wake somebody up, and it's like, oh, well, if they can do this, I can do something as well. And then it's a domino effect, similar to listening to the manifesto from the character from part one.
Right.
It's there's always going to be cracks in that control. It's unnatural,
Right.
people
Security is
people
unnatural.
enroll
Right.
into an army and don't even know it yet.
Right.
But even the speech that Andor gave the woman in the beginning of season 2, he's like, listen, you made this decision months ago. Don't worry about it at this point. Like, this is already done. We just need to finish it off and keep it going. It also is, again, as Toya said, it's going to be bloody. Luthen said, we're in this to win. So we're going to take loss after loss after loss after loss after loss until we're ready to finally fight back and win control. I do like the show shows you that there's many different ways that this can happen. You have Mon Mothma, where she was trying to talk her way and be political and try to be the peaceful way of going about things. You had Luthen, who was a diehard, whatever sacrifices have to be made to egg people on to see the truth, to get people moving, do what you need to do, cut all losses if you have to.
You had Saul Guerrero.
Yeah, Saul Guerrero, who was but with knowing Saw's story, he was polarized and he was what's the word? It's escaping me right now. But traumatized into that kind of living lifestyle. Like, he grew up in slavery under occupation. He lost his sister, and then now he's fighting the same empire that they turned into. And he was an extremist, but at the end of the day, he still got things done.
Right.
That's right.
No matter what. Like, it may not be on everyone's approved list, but as we all saw from From Andor to Rogue One, even in their little rebel council thing that they had, those two people who it just seems like they never wanted to believe anything.
Mhm.
Like, oh, it's a lie. That sounds like a fairy tale. What is this? Like, neither of you never ever want to believe anything, and that's fine. You don't have to believe. Sometimes you just have to do it.
Right.
But the whole point is, again, what Toya said, you have to do something. The smallest thing, again, let somebody in, turn the other way, donate some food to the cause,
Right.
something.
Right.
But
Right.
and I feel again, Andor was a large lesson for current generations, future generations who are watching this to understand that there is there's not a glamorized side of a rebellion war all the time. Again, there's not always Luke Skywalker's, Han Solos, Anakin's.
Yeah, the heroic.
Yes,
Right.
they will be there,
Right.
but you may never see this person, but your efforts to get them to that point to make that slam dunk,
Right.
you're a part of all of that. You're not always the main character.
Right. Right.
That's
Right.
okay.
Yeah. 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 And in the literature on political and social movements is an idea of this notion of genealogies of struggle or genealogies of resistance, meaning that whatever you see someone engaged in at this current moment, there were always generations that preceded them that contributed, right? And so, in order for Luke Skywalker to get that one bolt that he was guided by the Force to send down that shaft to blow up the Death Star, you see all of the generations, or at least some parts of the generations that led up to that. And so that's I would simply echo what y'all been saying, of the sense that don't think your small part doesn't contribute to a larger whole. You may be part of blowing up the Death Star, or let's bringing about a broader justice. And in fact, in my own work as a scholar about, there are many individuals in the civil rights movement who we only learned about within the last 20 years, but yet they were critical, right? Whether it be the contributions of women or others, who were key, but again, because the story wasn't glamorized, as you're saying, Naeem, then they weren't the kings of the movement or etc. We didn't know, and so you have to kind of dig down, but make your contribution all the same, and you can, this little light of mine, it can make a big difference in that regard. All right. All right. So we've done what we typically do on Black Spaces, is we provide a unique critique, and so I really do appreciate uh, Toya and Naeem. I say we're gonna talk for 10 minutes, then we go on for an hour. So because that's my big mouth, because I can't shut up. So anything on the horizon you want to alert us to, anything you're watching or waiting for on the horizon, sci-fi or fantasy related? I have something, but anything you looking forward to?
Have y'all seen Sinners?
Oh my,
Yes.
yes, okay, yes. I have. Sinners might be another. We might just have to break out of our genre and say, okay, because actually, I think there might be. I think we could bend a little futurism in Sinners. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's brilliant film. So if y'all haven't seen it, I'm not into
Agreed.
horror, but Sinners was the bomb. It was the bomb. Yeah.
Look at it from the historical aspect. You have to realize that yes, it is a horror film towards the later half
Right.
of the movie, as we traditionally assign horror as a
Right.
genre. But then you think about the horrors of what we saw the
That's
first
right.
half,
That's right.
with them working in the cotton fields, pretty
Right.
much as slaves.
Right.
The whole story about the lynching that took place just because someone had the audacity to
That's
want to
right.
have a better life.
Right.
That's horror,
That's right.
in a sense. So we can talk about it from a historical perspective.
We definitely can. We definitely can. In fact, a friend warned me to say, "Listen, you might find the questions about racism scarier than the vampires."
It's insidious.
Yeah, you got
Yes.
a point. You got a point. Um, Upcoming for me in terms of sci-fi stuff would be the Foundation series is going to kick off its next season this summer. So I'm kind of interested to see, what it does because I'm a Asimov fan. That's at least on some of the horizon for me. Yeah, you know.
Ironheart is coming out next month.
What's that again?
Ironheart is coming out next month on
Oh, okay,
Disney.
okay. Very cool. Very cool. All right. All right. That might call for another critique.
Sure, yeah. And it's
And I'm
Ryan
finishing up my
Coogler,
Doctor Who
so
watching on Disney Plus. So
What's
getting
that?
into Doctor Who,
Doctor
finishing
Who.
up with
That's
that.
true. That's true. Doctor Who coming up. All right. All right. So we got some stuff that who knows, good folks. Since we got the band back together, we might play a couple more tunes.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, well, thank you again, Toya, Naeem, and Toya, for co-piloting this with us, with me. And, we at Black Spaces, love you. So like us, if you will, subscribe, like, we'll have some special stuff in the next several months coming up. So check us out. And again, thank you very much. And I always forget my tagline. I should probably write it down. You can see I'm not doing this for professional purposes because it's like you should know how you end the show as well as how you begin the show. But anyway, I'll just say thanks again, and everyone be well. All right, take care.